Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
5 years. That's how long we were married. Not a lifetime, not a blink, just long enough to build habits that didn't feel like love anymore. My name is Julian Ward. I'm 37 years old, a regional sales manager for a medical equipment company, and until last week, I had a wife named Bianca. No children, no mess. Just the slow, deliberate unraveling of two people who stopped looking at each other. I remember the morning we signed the divorce papers. The room smelled like printer ink and stale coffee, and the lawyer didn't even bother making eye contact. Bianca was dressed in that sharp navy blazer she always wore when she wanted to feel in control. She didn't look at me when she signed, just clicked the pen, handed it back, and stood like we were at a meeting that ran too long. I said nothing. What was there to say? Every fight we should have had happened in silence, in missed glances across dinner tables, and the tension of untouched sheets at night. We didn't fall apart because of cheating or screaming or some dramatic betrayal. No, what broke us was quieter than that. Bianca used to say I didn't make enough time for her, that I lacked vision, that I was comfortable, like that was some kind of insult. She said she needed someone with hunger, someone who didn't settle. I worked. I paid the bills. I brought her tea when she was sick. But I wasn't enough. And when someone decides you're not enough, you stop trying to convince them otherwise. It had only been 7 days since the papers were finalized when my phone buzzed. I was on the treadmill, trying to outrun the silence in my apartment, when the notification popped up. A mutual friend had tagged Bianca in a post. I tapped out of instinct. And there it was. Bianca, radiant in white, smiling wide, framed by floral arches at what looked like a vineyard. She was standing next to a man I didn't recognize immediately. Her caption read, "Forever starts now. Grateful to have found my perfect husband." The comments section looked like a Pinterest board exploded. Hearts, blessings, well wishes. I just stared. Perfect husband. I read the caption again. The skin on my arms went cold, like the treadmill room had dropped 10 degrees. I wasn't surprised she'd moved on. That's the thing about Bianca, she never lingered in endings. But remarried? 1 week after we signed away 5 years. And gushing like she'd just won the love lottery? It didn't feel real. I sat down, heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with cardio. I wasn't angry, not exactly. It was something else, like watching someone rewrite your story while you were still holding the original draft. We didn't even tell everyone we were divorced yet. She didn't give our past a second of grace. No space to grieve. No pause to reflect. Just delete and replace. At first, I thought maybe it was just the photo, just a really aggressive rebound made to look permanent. But then I scrolled. There were more pictures. A video of the vows. Her laughing as the man tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. A reception shot with her in a different dress. This wasn't new love. This was prepared, planned, staged, which meant it had been in motion long before we signed those papers. I leaned back on the couch and stared at the ceiling, piecing it together. Bianca hadn't just moved on, she'd overlapped. While I was still holding on, trying to figure out what went wrong, she'd already drafted a new future, picked out centerpieces, and invited guests to witness a lie wrapped in lace. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about love. This was about image. Bianca was never going to be the woman who failed at marriage. No. She needed a narrative that kept her clean, above blame. A shiny new husband to prove she wasn't the problem. She hadn't left a man. She had upgraded. But the gnawing thing, the piece that wouldn't let me breathe fully, wasn't just her wedding. It was the fact that I hadn't seen it coming. I'd spent so much time rationalizing the silence between us, thinking maybe we were just in a rough patch, maybe work had drained us both, that I missed the fact she'd already checked out. I thought I was fighting for something we could fix. Turns out, she was packing for someone else's honeymoon. I stood up and walked to the window, the city buzzing quietly below. I wasn't heartbroken. Not really. I was humiliated. And somewhere under that, I felt relief. Because the moment I saw that post, I knew Bianca didn't find the perfect husband. She just found the perfect distraction. And me? I was finally free from being someone's placeholder. The thing about memories is that they don't come back in order. They arrive in fragments, smells, sounds, that clink of glassware when you're setting a table for two. 1 week before it all shattered, I had taken half a day off work to cook Bianca's favorite Moroccan lamb for our anniversary. Not because I thought it would save us, honestly. I didn't even know we were that close to the edge. but because I wanted to remind her that I still remembered the little things, that I still saw her. I set the table myself. White linen, 2 gold-rimmed plates, cloth napkins folded in a triangle like she liked. Candles, not scented, just tall and simple. I even queued up that playlist she used to listen to when we first started dating. The one with all those indie love songs she insisted I learn the lyrics to. I played it on low, just background warmth, and kept glancing at the time. She was supposed to be home by 7. By 8, the lamb was drying out in the oven, and I was switching between hope and quiet fury. Maybe she got stuck in traffic. Maybe she was wrapping up something important. I kept telling myself those things until they stopped making sense. The wine sat untouched, sweating condensation down its side. Her seat remained empty. The candle flames wavered for no one. At 8:43 p.m., I got an email. Not a call. Not a text. An email. Sorry, I got held up at work. Don't wait up. We'll talk tomorrow. That was all. No apology. No mention of the dinner. Just a 6-sentence brush-off like she was replying to a calendar invite. I stared at the screen, the light of it bleaching my face in the dim room, and felt something dull press against my chest. Not pain. Not yet. Just the beginning of understanding. The next morning, I called her office. The receptionist hesitated, said she couldn't transfer me, then finally admitted Bianca didn't work there anymore. She'd quit. The day before. I remember hanging up the phone in slow motion, as if I were afraid even the click would shatter something I wasn't ready to face. I stood in the kitchen, the scent of rosemary and roasted meat still lingering, and realized she'd lied to me before she even walked out. Lied when she wrote that email. Lied with the kind of ease that only comes after practice. When I got home from work that evening, she was packing. Not crying. Not rushing. Just calmly folding clothes into 2 suitcases like she was heading off on a long vacation. I opened the door and just stared at her. She turned, looked me in the eye, and said, "You already know why." Except I didn't. Not then. She handed me a manila envelope. Divorce papers. Neatly stapled, tabs marked with sticky notes. I hadn't even opened my mouth yet, and she was already halfway through zipping her second bag. "We've been going in circles," she said, like we'd both agreed. "It's time." "Bianca," I managed, barely getting her name past the dryness in my throat. "What's going on? This isn't just forgetting our anniversary." She rolled her eyes. "Julian, come on. You knew this was coming. You've been emotionally checked out for months." I almost laughed. Emotionally checked out? I just spent 6 hours cooking a meal she'd never touch. I'd been bending myself backwards trying to meet her where she never even stood. But I didn't argue. Something about the look on her face made it clear she wasn't here for discussion. She was here for a clean exit. I sat on the edge of the bed while she zipped up the last suitcase. "So that's it?" I asked. "After everything?" She paused by the closet, then gave me a look I'll never forget. Not angry. Not sad. Just done. "You don't see me anymore, Julian. And I got tired of waiting for you to remember how." Then she walked out. I sat there long after the sound of the door faded, staring at the place where her shoes used to be lined up. Her side of the closet, now hollow. The imprint on the pillow where her head used to rest. I was surrounded by absence. The irony is, I thought that anniversary dinner might mark a reset. That she'd walk through the door, see the candles, taste the food, and maybe something would click. Maybe we'd laugh. Maybe we'd talk for real. Maybe she'd remember us. Instead, she didn't even show up. And when she finally did, it was to say goodbye. But what I didn't know then, what I wouldn't discover until later, was that she hadn't just quit her job. She hadn't just checked out of our marriage. She'd already started building a new life before she had the courtesy to destroy the one we had. I didn't know who he was yet, but I would. There's a moment in every breakup when you start asking yourself the wrong questions. Was I really that bad? Did I forget something important? Did I miss a signal so obvious it might as well have been written on the wall? After Bianca left, those questions played on a loop in my mind like a broken song. And for a while, I bought into the version of me she had painted, apathetic, inattentive, uninspired. The kind of man a woman could walk away from without blinking. But here's the thing, I was never that man. I got up at 5 to prep quarterly pitches, took conference calls on weekends, and traveled constantly because her student loans were our loans. I worked late so she wouldn't have to. And when I did come home, I didn't crash on the couch or lose myself in a screen. I checked on her, asked how her day was, cooked when I could, and listened even when I was too tired to form full sentences. I wasn't perfect, but I sure as hell showed up. Still, she crafted a case against me like I was on trial. Her complaints weren't just criticisms, they were rehearsed lines. You don't even help with the dishes anymore. I have to remind you about everything. You don't care about how I feel. I'd ask for examples, for moments I could learn from. But her answers were always vague, broad strokes that made me look like a ghost in my own marriage. One night, I tried to fight back. Told her she never asked how I was doing, never paid attention to the stress I carried from work, never noticed that I was shrinking to keep her stable. She crossed her arms and said, "That's not my job, Julian. You're a grown man." That was her go-to. Anytime I tried to bring emotion into the room, she turned it into a weakness I was supposed to apologize for. But it wasn't until I ran into her sister, Tess, a few weeks after the divorce that the full picture started to form. We bumped into each other at the pharmacy, of all places, me picking up sinus meds, her grabbing nail polish remover and a six-pack of energy drinks. "Julian," she said, eyes widening like she hadn't expected me to still exist. "You look good. Thinner, maybe." "Stress diet," I said, forcing a smile. We chatted in that awkward, stuttered way people do when they're trying to be polite in public. But right as we were about to part ways, she paused, looked over her shoulder, then back at me. "She didn't leave because of the stuff she told you," Tess said. "You know that, right?" I blinked. "Come again." She was seeing someone. For over a year. She just couldn't admit it. My body stiffened. "You're serious?" Tess sighed, like she'd held it in too long. I told her to come clean. Told her she was rewriting history just to justify what she was doing. But you know Bianca. She'd rather play the victim than admit she chose herself over honesty. I stood there in that aisle, shelves of cold medicine and greeting cards around me, feeling like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. The pieces started shifting in my head, clicking into place with terrifying ease. The late nights, the guarded phone, the increased criticism, like she was trying to convince herself that I deserved to be left. She said I didn't cook enough, I muttered. Tess rolled her eyes. "Julian, you're the only man I know who makes souffle for fun." She just needed reasons. She found them where she could. I nodded slowly, gripping the edge of my basket to steady myself. "Did she tell you who it was?" Tess hesitated. "She mentioned him once. Said he was refined. Smart. Someone with vision." She said that last part with a smirk, like the word had become a punchline. "Vision," I echoed bitterly. "Right." And just like that, I was free from the illusion I had been clinging to. Bianca hadn't left because I failed her. She left because she had a safety net waiting. She used my so-called flaws to cushion her leap into someone else's arms. She had to make me the villain so her story wouldn't look like betrayal. On the drive home, I couldn't stop clenching the steering wheel. Not in anger, but in recognition. I'd spent so long thinking I needed to become a better man to be worthy of her love. But now I realized I was already a good man. I just gave that goodness to someone who never wanted to receive it. Someone who mistook patience for passivity and sacrifice for smallness. And the man she left me for? I didn't know his name yet, but I knew one thing for sure, he wasn't better. He was just newer. And that was enough for Bianca. At least for now. I don't know what I expected when I opened the message from Leo, an old friend of ours, or hers now, I guess. The kind of guy who played both sides with a smile, never picking a team until the winning one was clear. It was a short message. No warning, no apology. Just a blurry photo and a line of text. "Thought you should see this." I almost ignored it. But curiosity has a sharp edge when you've been lied to. I tapped the image, expecting maybe a vacation pic or some tabloid-worthy engagement ring close-up. What I got was a punch to the chest. Bianca. In white. Again. But this time, it wasn't the dress that froze me, it was the venue. I recognized it immediately. The old lakeside chapel in Edgewater, where we got married 5 years ago. Except now it looked upgraded, renovated, draped in even more flowers, strung with fairy lights like something out of a magazine. And there she was, smiling wider than I'd ever seen her in the last 2 years of our marriage, clutching the arm of a man who made my stomach twist. He looked familiar. Something about his jawline, the way he stood with performative confidence, like the world was supposed to be watching him. I zoomed in, and I stopped breathing. Brent Ashford. The name hit me like a slap. Not Brent A. Fields, the startup mogul Bianca had posted about in her romantic caption, the one she gushed about having true clarity and ambition, and all those words that sounded like she'd copy-pasted them from a motivational speaker's bio. No, it was Brent Ashford, my college roommate. The same guy who once got arrested for selling counterfeit Coachella wristbands and pirated DVD box sets out of our dorm room closet. I hadn't seen Brent in years. The last I heard, he was couch hopping through Miami, calling himself a business coach, while living off half-baked ebooks and flashy Instagram posts. He was slick, sure. Always had been. Slick enough to talk his way out of trouble and into women's hearts. But successful? Stable? The kind of man Bianca described? Not even close. I sank into the couch, the phone still glowing in my hand, and just stared at the screen like the pixels would rearrange themselves into a joke. But the joke was already there. It was written across their matching smiles and that polished setup that mimicked our own wedding, right down to the flower arrangements. Except fancier. Like she took our day, ran it through a luxury filter, and plastered it over a stranger. Except he wasn't a stranger. He was my former friend. A walking red flag in designer clothes. I remembered Brent showing up to dorm parties with champagne he couldn't afford, spinning stories about imaginary companies and offshore investments. He once pitched me a pyramid scheme during finals week and didn't understand why I said no. "Don't you want to retire by 35? He asked with a grin. Think bigger, Julian. Back then, thinking bigger meant not ending up like him. So how did he end up in a tuxedo, standing next to my ex-wife in the exact spot we once said? I do. I wanted to believe it was coincidence. That Bianca didn't know who he was, that somehow they'd crossed paths without realizing our shared history. But the timing was too perfect. The lies too clean. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional. I sat in silence, my hands clenched. Not out of jealousy, but clarity. Bianca had traded one version of me for another. A louder, shinier, riskier version. A man who made noise instead of sense. Who probably promised her a mansion, a yacht, a startup empire. She didn't just want more, she wanted flash. A fantasy to erase the boring reality I apparently represented. The betrayal wasn't that she remarried so fast. It was who she chose. A man who used to pretend his shoes were made of Italian leather when we both knew he bought them from a strip mall outlet. Brent was all image. No substance. And Bianca? She used to pride herself on being grounded. Now she was grinning on Instagram like she'd won the lottery. But I knew what came next. I knew Brent. And sooner or later, he'd slip. He always did. The champagne would run out. The workshops would dry up. The sparkle would dull. And then what? I put the phone down, ran a hand over my face, and stared at the ceiling. My first thought wasn't revenge. It wasn't even anger. It was relief. Relief that I was no longer the one trying to meet Bianca's impossible expectations. That I didn't have to wear ambition like a costume or pretend I wanted to build castles in the sky. Let Brent do the dance. Let him juggle the lies and sell the image. Sooner or later, the house of cards would fall. And when it did, I'd be long gone, already standing in the truth she walked away from. There's a difference between reinvention and disguise. Reinvention takes work. It's rooted in growth, accountability. Reinvention means owning where you've been and choosing better. But disguise? That's what Brent mastered. And somehow, Bianca bought into it like it was scripture. After I saw the wedding photo, I did what any man with internet access and quiet rage would do. I ducked. Not because I wanted her back, but because something wasn't sitting right. Bianca had always claimed she wanted stability, vision, a man who knew where he was going. So how did she end up with Brent? Simple answer? She didn't know who he was. Not really. The deeper answer? She didn't want to know. I started with his social media. Brent A. Fields. That's what he called himself now. The Ashford was gone, replaced with something sleeker, something that probably looked better on credit applications and business cards. His page was filled with glossy photos, rooftop brunches, rented Bentleys, heavily filtered selfies with crypto buzzwords in the captions. Financial freedom starts with the mindset. Trust the hustle. Your net worth is tied to your network. All fluff. All brand. I clicked through the comments, noticed the same pattern, bots, fanboys, and desperate newbies hoping to get put on. I've been in sales my whole life. I know a pitch when I see one. And this? This wasn't business. This was theater. Brent didn't run a hedge fund. He didn't build anything. He curated a fantasy so well that even Bianca, once the queen of sniffing out phoniness, had fallen for it. Or maybe she needed to. That was the thing with Bianca. She never liked being left behind. While we were together, she constantly compared our lives to people online. Look at how Jenna's husband surprised her with a weekend trip to Paris, she'd say. Or, how does Ava's boyfriend already have 2 properties? I'd remind her we were paying off her grad school debt, saving, playing the long game. But the long game bored her. She wanted the highlight reel, not the process. Brent gave her that. Or at least, the illusion of it. I reached out to an old buddy from college, Trey, who used to run in the same circles as Brent. If anyone knew where the bodies were buried, it was him. Trey didn't disappoint. "Brent's a walking scam, man," he texted. "Changed his name after that mess in Tampa. You didn't hear?" I didn't. Apparently, after disappearing for a few years, Brent popped back up as a crypto advisor during the boom. He rented a penthouse in Miami using an investor's money, hosted fake seminars, and resold PDF guides from Reddit as exclusive trading strategies. When things got hot, he rebranded. Again, different name, different city. Always just enough flash to distract from the rot. I asked if he had any proof. Trey sent screenshots. One was a flyer from a workshop Brent hosted in Atlanta, complete with typos and fake testimonials. Another was a complaint posted on a public forum by a woman who said Brent took $5,000 for personal coaching and then ghosted her. My stomach turned. Not because I was shocked, but because Bianca was now married to this man. Her name attached to his. And she was selling him like gold. The final piece of the puzzle came from an old acquaintance who used to work for a financial blog. He'd done a background check on Brent for a piece that never ran. The findings? Shaky credit history, no registered business in his name, and a series of P.O. boxes used to funnel payments through a shell company. Classic grifter architecture. Bianca had married a man who didn't just lie, he profited from it. And the irony? She called him refined. That was the word that stuck in my brain like a splinter. Brent's refined. Driven. Not like before. As if a rented Rolex and filtered Instagram quotes were enough to rewrite a man's past. He hadn't changed. He'd just put on a cleaner mask. What twisted the knife deeper was realizing she never told him about me. Not really. Because if she had, Brent would have run. He knew me. Knew I remembered what he did in that dorm. How he got expelled after running a fake escort referral ring from his laptop. I was the one who cleaned up the mess after the cops knocked on our door. But maybe she didn't ask. Maybe she didn't want to know. She saw what she needed to see, a man who said all the right things, wore the right suits, and promised a shortcut to everything she ever wanted. And what did I feel? Not revenge. Not fury. Just clarity. Clarity that I'd been replaced not by someone better, but by someone bolder in their deception. A man who took shortcuts while I built slowly. A man who made promises while I made sacrifices. Bianca didn't want a partner. She wanted a performance. And now, she was part of the act. I hadn't heard Bianca's voice in weeks. Not since she walked out with that cold finality that still echoed in the empty spaces of our apartment. So when my phone rang on a rainy Tuesday night and her name lit up the screen, I didn't answer right away. I just stared at it. Watched the name flicker like a ghost that forgot it wasn't welcome anymore. The call ended. I exhaled. Then it rang again. Curiosity beat out pride. I answered. Julian. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. Not weak, just careful. Like she was stepping onto a frozen lake and afraid it might crack. Yeah, I said flatly, leaning against the kitchen counter, my dinner still untouched beside me. I need to ask you something, she said. And please, just tell me the truth. That pulled a bitter smile out of me. Funny. That's all I ever wanted from you. Silence. Then a shaky breath. Did you know Brent before? Before all this? I almost dropped the phone laughing. Bianca, I said slowly, I shared a dorm with him in college. Brent Ashford. Not Brent Fields. I knew him before the fake suits and the Instagram filters. She didn't respond at first, but I could hear her breathing. Fast. Shallow. I went on, not because she deserved the history, but because I needed to say it out loud, maybe for myself more than for her. He got expelled, B. For running an escort scam online and trying to frame one of our professors to dodge accountability. He lived off borrowed money and fake stories. Once tried to fake a cancer diagnosis to get out of debt. That's who he is. Another silence. Then, quietly, he told me you two were enemies. That you tried to ruin him. I laughed. A short, sharp bark. Of course he did. That's what con men do. They create villains to make themselves look like heroes. I expected her to hang up, or maybe defend him. But instead, she asked, why didn't you say anything before? I closed my eyes, rubbed my temple. Because by the time I figured it out, you were already posting wedding photos like he was the second coming of Elon Musk. And what would have happened if I told you then? You'd have said I was jealous. Bitter. Trying to sabotage your happiness. She didn't deny it. And that told me everything I needed to know. I thought I was building a new life, she said finally, her voice brittle. He promised me so much. He promised everyone something, I replied. That's the trick. I thought he was different. No, I said gently. You thought I wasn't enough. And he just showed up with the right words at the right time. I don't know why I said that with so much calm. Maybe because the rage had finally cooled into something clearer. Something that didn't sting anymore. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I just wanted her to see what I'd known all along. Julian, she whispered, and for a second, I heard something in her voice that used to be there years ago, before everything turned into performance. He asked me to take out a loan. Of course he did. And did you? No, she said, almost defensively. But he keeps dropping hints. Keeps talking about expanding the business, getting more investors. I asked him for proof, for financials, and he got angry. I nodded to myself, even though she couldn't see it. That's his pattern. Pressure, manipulate, distract. He's not building anything, Bianca. He's playing house until the electricity bill comes due. I think he might be cheating, she added after a long pause. He hides his phone. Gets weird when I ask who he's texting. The irony was rich. The man who broke up our marriage by exploiting your suspicions was now casting the same shadows over you. He said I'm too flirtatious, she continued, her voice cracking slightly. That men stare at me too much. He accused me of trying to make him jealous. I don't even recognize him anymore. Or maybe, I thought, you finally do. Are you cheating? I asked, softly. She was silent for a long time. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, no, but I don't feel safe. Those words hit harder than I expected. Not because I still loved her. That ship had sailed and burned. But because despite everything, I'd once promised to protect her, to stand by her. And now she was calling me like a woman standing in the middle of a house made of glass, watching it crack around her. Julian, she said, almost pleading. What do I do? I wanted to say, you go. You run. You pack a bag and leave before the next lie costs you everything. But all I said was, you already know. Because she did. She always had. She just didn't want to admit that she'd married the worst version of the story she used to accuse me of being. And now that the story was unraveling, she realized the chapters weren't written in ink. They were scribbled in disappearing marker. After we hung up, I stood at the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even satisfied. But I was finally at peace. Because the man she left me for had shown her the truth. And it didn't look anything like a fairy tale. The message came early. Bianca never texted before noon unless it was important or chaotic. This one was both. Can we talk? Please. It's urgent. I didn't answer right away. I set the phone down, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table while the morning sunlight cast long lines across the floor. I wasn't rushing to her anymore. Not with sympathy, not with curiosity. But something in her tone, desperate, almost hollow, tugged at the corner of my mind. When I finally replied with a simple, go ahead, I didn't expect the whirlwind that followed. I might be pregnant, she wrote. I read the words twice. Then again. There was no emoji, no exclamation, no smiley face celebration. Just flat uncertainty. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I typed. Might? Late. Tests are inconclusive. Going to the doctor this week. I sat back in my chair, the mug cooling in my hand. Pregnant. With Brent's child. That possibility hung in the air like smoke, thick, unavoidable. I didn't feel what I thought I might. No jealousy, no ache, no sharp edge of loss. What I felt instead was something harder to name. A heaviness. Not for me. For her. Because I already knew what came next. He's not excited, she added a minute later. Actually, he's freaking out. Of course he is. He asked if I could get a paternity test. Just to be sure. There it was. The sting she wasn't expecting. Brent, the man she gave up everything for, was now accusing her of infidelity. The irony was cruel and surgical. I let it sit for a second before responding. And I'm not even sure how to feel about that, she wrote. I mean, I've never cheated on anyone. You know that. I stared at the screen, the words a bitter echo of conversations from our past. Conversations where I'd sit on the defense while she scrutinized my late nights at work or my texts from female coworkers. She was always wary, always ready to believe the worst of me with the flimsiest evidence. But now that the lens was turned on her, she was wounded by the same suspicion she once wielded like a blade. He said I flirt too much, she went on. That I smile at other men just to get attention. He thinks I want him to feel insecure. Do you? I typed, not because I believed it, but because I wanted to hear her say it out loud. The typing bubble blinked, then vanished, then blinked again. No, she replied at last. I didn't expect this. I thought he'd be happy. Why would he be? I replied. Brent's not wired for stability. A baby isn't a next step to him. It's a trapdoor. There was no response for a while. I imagined her sitting in their apartment. Maybe one of those fancy high-rises he liked to pose in, full of rented furniture and unpaid bills, staring at the same future she once promised to build with me, now fraying at the seams. He doesn't touch me anymore, she finally said. Barely talks to me unless he needs something. But when I try to leave the apartment, he watches me. Like, he doesn't trust me. That sentence sat heavier than the rest. He ever lay a hand on you? I asked. No, not yet. But sometimes the way he talks, another pause. It's like he's testing the boundary, seeing how far he can push me. I closed my eyes. Not in anger. In mourning. Not for us, but for who she used to be. The Bianca I met at that rooftop party 8 years ago, with her sarcastic smile and relentless standards, wouldn't have stood for this. But somewhere along the way, in chasing the illusion of a perfect life, she traded her instincts for aesthetics. You said he asked for a paternity test, I reminded her. Do you think that's what this is really about? The baby. She didn't answer. Because we both knew it wasn't. This was about control. The mask Brent wore was slipping, and what lay beneath was a man she didn't recognize. Or worse, a man she always suspected but never admitted to herself. I don't know what to do, she wrote again. I'm scared. Not just about the baby. About what he's capable of. I exhaled through my nose, rubbing a hand over my face. I wasn't her savior anymore. That ship had capsized long ago. But I couldn't ignore her either. You need to leave, I replied. Get out now. Before you're tied to this man for good. Before a child comes into the middle of a fraud. What if I am pregnant? She asked. Then you fight like hell for that child's safety. And your own. The typing bubble blinked once more. But this time, it didn't vanish. Thank you, she wrote. For listening. For not throwing it in my face. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because it was the first time in a long time that she'd finally heard herself without needing me to echo her fears back. And sometimes, silence says exactly what needs to be said. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Running into Brent was never part of the plan. In fact, I'd gone out of my way to avoid any overlap, stayed clear of events Bianca might attend, unfollowed everyone we had in common. But fate, or irony, has a cruel sense of timing. It was a networking event for sales professionals, a sleek rooftop mixer in the city with overpriced cocktails and the hum of calculated ambition. The kind of place where business cards get handed out like candy and everyone's pretending to be more important than they are. I was halfway through a conversation with a medical rep from Boston when I felt it, a shift in the room's energy. A pause, a stillness. I turned, and there he was, Brent, wearing a charcoal blazer, tied around the shoulders like it had been borrowed last minute. His smile was wide, polished, the same one I remembered from college, the one that always made you question whether he was actually listening or just rehearsing his next line. And for a second, I wondered if he would pretend not to see me. But Brent was too arrogant for that. Julian, he called, cutting through the crowd with performative delight. Man, small world, huh? He stuck out his hand like we were long-lost friends instead of footnotes in each other's wreckage. I took it, gripped it a little too firmly, just enough for him to feel it. Brent, I said, giving him the same fake smile he wore. Didn't expect to see you here. He chuckled, brushing a hand through his hair, glancing around like he owned the rooftop. You know how it is, always expanding the network. Trying to bring some fresh energy into the scene. Fresh energy. That was rich, coming from a man who repackaged borrowed wisdom and sold it like gospel. Last I heard, you were doing crypto hedge work, I said, keeping my tone even. You move into med sales too? He blinked, just for a split second. Oh, nah, just tagging along tonight. My buddy's running the catering gig. Thought I'd swing by, maybe stir up some interest for my next workshop. Always building. Of course. Always building. On sand. He sipped from his drink and looked me over, and I could tell he was trying to gauge what I knew, how much Bianca had told me, if she'd mentioned that phone call, that suspicion crawling at the edges of his perfect life. Still with the company, he asked casually, as if we were just two guys catching up over coffee. Promoted, I said. Regional director now. Running 5 markets. His eyebrows lifted, just a touch. Damn. That's solid, man. Bianca never mentioned that. I smiled without warmth. She stopped keeping track. That landed. For the first time, his mask slipped. Just a fraction. a flicker in his eyes. Insecurity, or maybe fear, tightening the corners of his mouth. Well, he said, straightening his posture, she's doing good now. We're doing good. Got some big plans ahead. I nodded, stepping in just a little closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. Tell Bianca she married the wrong version of you. He froze. That was it. No dramatic outburst. No physical reaction. Just that stillness, like I'd knocked the wind out of a balloon and left it to sag quietly. I don't know what you mean, he said, voice suddenly tighter. Oh, I think you do. I let the smile fade from my face. I've seen your type before. Hell, I roomed with it. You mimic the man you think people want. You wear other people's ambitions like suits that don't quite fit. But eventually, they notice the seams. He looked away for the first time, scanning the crowd for a distraction, a way out. But there was none. Not from me. Not from the truth. You really think she's going to stay when she finds out everything? I asked quietly. About the debt, the fake businesses, the coaching scams? Or maybe she already has. That last part wasn't bait. It was a test. He swallowed hard, eyes flashing for a second. There it was. The crack. People change, Julian, he said, reaching for a shaky kind of confidence. Not everyone stays stuck in the past. No, I said. Some people just pretend long enough to get what they want. We stood there for a beat, two versions of her past and present facing each other, and I could feel it in my bones. He was unraveling. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly, the way liars do when the room stops clapping. Brent left the event early. Said something about another engagement. Didn't even finish his drink. I watched him go, not with anger, but with the strange satisfaction of knowing I didn't have to lift a finger. He was doing the damage himself. 2 weeks later, I heard from Tess, Bianca's sister. They're separating, she said simply. Apparently Brent's got financial issues. Real ones. Creditors. Old lawsuits. She's devastated. I thanked her for the update, but I didn't say what I was thinking. This was never about revenge. It was about truth. And sometimes, the best justice is letting the truth walk in, sit down, and turn on all the lights. The subject line was just her name, Bianca. No exclamation. No emojis. Just that. At first, I thought it might be spam. Or maybe a forwarded article from an old mailing list we never bothered to unsubscribe from. But when I opened the email and saw her full name in the signature block, complete with a new address and a phone number I didn't recognize, I knew it was her. And I knew it wasn't going to be short. She started with an apology. Not one of those brittle, half-hearted ones. No passive voice. No sorry if you felt. It was direct. Raw. In her words. Not her mother's or her therapist's or some influencer's post. She said, I owe you a real apology, and not just for how things ended. For how I made you feel while we were still together. For rewriting our story so I didn't have to own my part in it. I sat in silence for a while after that first paragraph, unsure whether I should keep reading. A part of me felt like I'd already gotten closure. But another part, the quieter, more honest part, wanted to know if she'd finally faced the truth. She had. She wrote about Brent first. Said it quickly fell apart after our last conversation. That she started seeing the signs the moment the wedding high wore off. At first, it was little things, dodged questions, late-night phone calls he wouldn't explain, business trips that led nowhere. Then came the credit cards. Not hers. Her parents. He'd convinced her to ask them to invest in his next big play. And they did. $40,000 wired into a company that didn't exist. And then the truth unraveled. The crypto hedge fund? Fabricated. No registered business. No employees. Just a rented WeWork space, a Squarespace site, and a virtual assistant he paid with exposure. Brent had no portfolio. No strategy. No future. He was running on fumes and borrowed charm. Then came the loans. She found 3 in her name. Applications she never signed for, forged with digital signatures and fake addresses. One was already in default. The other 2 were maxed out. Her credit score had plummeted before she even realized what he'd done. Her parents tried to get involved, threatened legal action. But Brent vanished overnight, cleared out the apartment, disconnected his phone. Gone. Just like that. Everything he told me was a lie, she wrote. But that's not what haunts me. What haunts me is how easy it was for me to believe it, because I wanted to. She told me she replayed our last few years in her head, over and over, trying to find the moment she started resenting me for being steady, for being present, for being boring. And every time, she said, She came back to the same conclusion. She was bored with herself. I had become the mirror she couldn't lie to anymore. The man who didn't promise fireworks, but who showed up, day after day, without applause. I mistook consistency for complacency, she wrote, and I punished you for it. I exhaled when I read that line. A long, low breath I didn't realize I'd been holding since the day she left. Then came the part one didn't expect. She told me she'd gone back to her parents' house, that she'd been staying in her childhood bedroom, sleeping in the same bed she used to dream in when she was 15. It's ironic, she wrote. I wanted to escape my old life so badly, and now it's the only safe place I have left. She said she'd started seeing a therapist, not for damage control, not for the performance of healing, but because, in her words, I've hurt too many people while pretending I was the one bleeding. And then she asked if we could meet, just to talk, not for reconciliation, not for closure, just to put human voices to the wreckage. She said she wanted to look me in the eye and apologize properly, not through text, not through email, but face to face. I didn't respond right away. I closed the laptop and went for a walk, the late evening breeze brushing against my skin like something trying to wake me up. I passed the bakery where we used to buy croissants on Sunday mornings, the bookstore where she once cried in the aisle because a random poem reminded her of her father. So many memories buried in the city like roots under pavement. And somehow, they didn't sting anymore. They just were. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, same one I once sat with candles and wine and hope, and reread her message. She was right. She had rewritten the past. But this time, she was trying to tell the truth. Still, I never replied. Not out of spite. Not out of indifference. But because some apologies are meant to be read, not heard. Some doors are better left closed, not locked, not barricaded, but gently, permanently shut. And for the first time in years, I wasn't curious about what she might say next. I was finally done waiting. A full year. That's how long it's been since Bianca walked out, since the email, since the unraveling of everything I thought was solid. And strangely, I don't think about her much anymore. She's not a ghost in my apartment or a shadow in my thoughts. She's just someone I used to love. Someone I once imagined a life with before she became a lesson wrapped in silk and silence. Now, there's Danielle. I met her at a friend's birthday party, a simple gathering in a backyard with string lights and grilled skewers, the kind of event Bianca would have called low effort. But Danielle? She was sitting cross-legged on a patio chair, sipping ginger beer and debating whether dogs or toddlers were more exhausting. She laughed with her whole face, the kind of laugh that didn't ask for attention, didn't need approval. And when we started talking, it wasn't flirtatious. It was easy, real. She's a nurse, works overnight shifts, doesn't wear makeup unless she wants to, and she never once asked me what my 5-year plan was. Instead, she asked about my favorite song as a kid, what my first heartbreak taught me, if I'd rather watch the sunrise in silence or with someone who talked the whole time. With Danielle, there's no performance. We cook together, nothing fancy. Pasta with too much garlic, pancakes for dinner, random takeout when we're both too tired. She doesn't need elaborate gestures. When I bring her a cup of coffee exactly the way she likes it, half a sugar, oat milk, her eyes light up like I just gave her diamonds. Sometimes we take long walks in the evening, no destination in mind. I'll talk about my job, and she'll vent about patience and policies, and we'll fall into that rhythm of shared space. She listens, really listens, not just to reply but to understand. I used to think that kind of connection only existed in fiction. Now I know it's just rare. And when it shows up, you don't let it slip through your fingers. One night, we passed a street musician playing that old Otis Redding song, These Arms of Mine. Danielle hummed along, off-key and unbothered. I smiled, and without meaning to, I thought about Bianca. Just for a second. About how she once said that kind of music was too slow for her taste. I realized then, I don't miss her. Not the way she looked, or laughed, or smelled like rosemary and ambition. What I miss is the version of me I tried to be for her. The man who overextended, overpromised, and always came up short. Danielle never makes me feel small. With her, I am enough, even on my quietest days. Last I heard, Bianca's living with her parents again. Brent? Facing fraud charges in another state. Apparently, he tried to open another investment firm, this time under a new alias, but someone tipped off the authorities. It wasn't me. I didn't need to get involved. Truth has a way of catching up, and Brent left a trail too wide to outrun. A friend from Bianca's old job told me she's working at a nonprofit now. Less money, more fulfillment. I hope that's true. I really do. I hope she's waking up without panic. That she stopped chasing highlight reels and learned how to sit still with herself. We were never right for each other, but that doesn't mean I want her to suffer. Growth doesn't require bitterness. The real laugh, the one that stayed with me, came when I stumbled across a wedding blog randomly one afternoon. Someone had shared photos from their ceremony at Edgewater Lake, the same venue Bianca and I had both used. The photographer's website linked back to a portfolio, and there it was. Bianca's second wedding photo. Her in the white dress. Brent in the tux. Except this time, I wasn't stunned or hurt or hollow. I laughed. Not out loud. Not cruelly. Just a quiet, knowing laugh. Because what I saw wasn't love. It was branding. A curated image from two people who tried to manifest substance through aesthetics. Bianca didn't marry Brent because he was better. She married him because he reflected the part of herself she was most afraid to face, the part that needed validation, that craved applause, that wanted life to look good from the outside even if it was collapsing within. She married the version of herself she couldn't admit existed. And me? I walked away. Not because I lost, but because I finally saw that staying in that story would have cost me everything I am. Now, when I wake up beside Danielle and the sun is pouring through the curtains, I feel something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness. Not the cold kind that comes with distance or silence, but the warm kind. The kind that wraps around your shoulders and reminds you that you're safe, steady, seen. And for the first time, I'm not trying to be the best version of someone else's dream. I'm just living mine.